Well, welcome all. Welcome. It's so nice to have you all. And uh, Jon Kabat-Zinn really he needs no introduction, but as you know, he's the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. Some people have called it mindfulness-based suffering reduction, and I think we'll get into some of that territory here in time. But I wanted to thank you, Jon, for coming and joining us, and thank you all for joining us as well. I wanted to start maybe with just a poem, Jon, that's in one of your books. We'll mostly be talking, I think, about wherever you go, there you are, and full catastrophe living. These are books that have a very long life. They've been, I don't know, 35 or 40 years and several revisions, and they're still very, very popular. And from what I read on the internet, sold over 1 million copies each. So Jon's work has really touched millions of people, and it's just a great pleasure to get to know your work and to get to know you. So
Thank you.
This was in a poem by Yunmen. In autumn, the moon, in spring, flowers, in summer, cool breezes, in winter, snow. When idle concerns don't cloud the mind, this is the happiest season. I think that's really appropriate for your mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And so, Jon, let me ask you. We were talking earlier in the green room about how you came to Zen and what Zen was, how important it was to you in the early days.
Well, first, let me just say how honored I am to be with all of you. This wonderful Sangha that I've actually clicked through a few pages of it, so I'm seeing your faces and recognizing some of you that I go way back with, like Doug Phillips and Jon himself. It's really, really touching to be here. And so I'm guessing that everybody who's here is here because, in some sense or other, what we could call the Dharma sooner or later made its way into your life and everything changed, I'm guessing. And that's certainly the case for me. And I'll tell you in very brief, since you asked, how that happened for me. I was 21 years old or 20 years old, walking down the hallway at MIT, depressed out of my mind in 1965 because get rid of all these things on my screen. In 1965, because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Vietnam War was heating up, and it was really a terrible time, much like right now is a terrible time. And the diagnosis for this terrible time is even worse than that one. So it's a wonderful moment for us to get together and as lovers and practitioners of the Dharma. So I see this sign on the wall, 1965, that says, The Three Pillars of Zen, a talk by Philip Kapleau at the invitation of Houston Smith. So I didn't know who Houston Smith was. I didn't know who Philip Kapleau was. I didn't know what Zen was. But somehow I managed to get to that talk at MIT during seminar hour in my first year as a graduate student there. And when I went into the room, there was Houston Smith and Kapleau, and then 3 other people. And so I was like, there were 4 people that went to that talk. And that talk blew the top off my head. And, I started meditating that night, and I never stopped. So that's how I got into it. And of course, you probably are, familiar with Kapleau and his teachings and what the 3 pillars of Zen is. But my primary teacher wasn't Kapleau, who actually, I wanted to go on a session with him at the Rochester Zen Center. But then somehow, I don't know how it came up, but I said I also practiced yoga, Hatha yoga. And he said, well, if you're practicing Hatha yoga, you can't come to our session. So I said, well, okay, I'm not coming. I'm happy not to come if that's your attitude. Years later, I found out, and in fact, I gave the talks at the 40th anniversary of the Rochester Zen Center and the 50th anniversary of the Rochester Center. And I was supposed to meet with him at the 40th anniversary, but he died several weeks before I got there. So we never did actually connect on that thing. But they gave me he told me I couldn't go because I did Hatha yoga, but it turns out he did Hatha yoga and wrote a book about it. Anyway, they gave me his harmonica at one of those celebrations as a kind of very sweet gift, a very long jazz harmonica, which I have and my grandkids play. So that's how I got into it. But I started, as I said, I just started sitting then, and it just made all the difference in the world to me to find a way to settle into the present moment and then have some kind of perspective on reality that was not entirely thought-based.
And then I think you took up some practice with Sung Sanim. Was that the Korean?
Yeah. Well, then what happened was that at a certain point, I was teaching at Brandeis. I was teaching biology and meditation at Brandeis, and Larry Rosenberg and I overlapped for 1 year. Larry had been teaching meditation in the sociology department at Brandeis for a very long time, and it was an extremely popular course. And I would go out. I'd drive him out. We'd take a sauna at MIT, and then I'd drive him out to Brandeis from Cambridge, and he would teach his class. And so we where was I? What was I saying about?
And so Sung Sanim,
Oh yeah, so Sung
studied
Sanim.
some years with him.
I'm sorry, and so I lost the thread with Sung Sanim. So at a certain point, teaching at Brandeis, I had a student in my class who actually, I got to meet her because I wanted to make a zafu, to learn how to make zafus myself. And she taught me how to sew and how to make yoga pants in a zafu. And then she said to me, there's this Korean Zen master down in Providence who's starting this thing called the Providence Zen Center. And I think you'd really like him. So I went down to Providence and to his Providence Zen Center, and I really did like him. And so he became my teacher, and together with Stephen Mitchell and Larry and a bunch of other people, we founded the Cambridge Zen Center with Sung Sanim, as the teacher, and studied with him, Sung San, if you will, for a number of years. And he was just beyond wonderful. He was just a wild man from the get-go, and so very kind of outside of thinking kind of teaching. And we just loved it. But then came a time at which, it was obvious that he was also doing some things that were seriously unethical. So we handed in our robes and our bowls and said adios, and and I learned a few really wonderful lessons from that. One was, take the teachings, but don't take the teacher. The teacher is basically just a catalyst for the transmission of Dharma. And very often, teachers come with a whole range of different kinds of issues. And so you have to be extremely discerning about why you're really there, or you can get into big trouble. So And I must say, my connection with San Sanim has endured for over 50 years. He's been dead for a very long time, but now I have a deep connection with the in Korea with the whole Shogye order of Song Buddhism, and Venerable Jinwoo, who's the head of the whole order. We've met a number of times and communicate, and they kind of look at MBSR as a branch of their own tradition, and the UN starting last year declared the winter solstice as World Meditation Day, and they celebrated that in Korea. And I have photographs of Hye Young-an, who's been teaching MBSR in Korea for over 20 years, together with Venerable Jinwoo and a whole bunch of other monastics from different traditions, all celebrating World Meditation Day in a kind of really ecumenical way. And so one of the themes that I would say may be worth talking about today is like, there are a lot of different traditions, Dharma traditions, and a lot of different teachers, which is all absolutely wonderful. And no two teachers ever teach even the same Dharma the same way, even if they're teaching out of text, as the Tibetans very often will do. And I feel like at this point on planet Earth, the Dharma, through in various ways, is kind of emerging into the mainstream in ways that would have been basically inconceivable. And part of that is because we brought it into medicine and bringing medicine and meditation together, because they're linked at the etymological hip anyway, and then doing science on MBSR and other mindfulness-based interventions over close to 50 years now has really moved the bell curve of people's attitudes about, is meditation weird or is it not weird? Is it Buddhist or is it not Buddhist? And in some sense, it's inviting all of us to really reflect on what Dharma really is. And I love that, because I feel like, we really do have to, or at least I take the position that it's a many doors, one room phenomenon to a first approximation. Every teacher is another door, and you go in the door. But the important thing isn't to stand in the doorway and admire the teacher or the temple, but to actually recognize your true nature. And everybody is going to have a slightly different way of doing that, just like all the texts are different doors into similar rooms. And so maybe the Dharma has some role to play in the world that the world is actually dying for, starving for, calling out for. And, and in the past, 12 months, as even unimaginable ways that we couldn't have foreseen before. That when Full Catastrophe Living came out in 1990, my publisher said to me before it was published, he said, "Jon, you just cannot put the word catastrophe in the title of a book, because no one will read it. No one wants to buy a book that has the word catastrophe. It's intrinsically aversive." And so I spent 2 years, in my sleep, coming up with hundreds, thousands of titles. And I had some really wonderful titles, but that title would not leave me alone. That was the title of the book. And finally, I told him, I just can't get rid of this title. And he said, it's okay. And then 5 or 6 years later, he wrote me a note saying, "You were right."
Do you think most people know the source of that quote, of that?
Well, they do if they've read the book. Otherwise, no, because it's not even from the book. It's from the movie Zorba the Greek with Anthony Quinn. It's not in Kazantzakis's book itself, but in the script of the movie. And I'll say it if you like, for just the people who are listening. There's a point at which Zorba the Greek is this wild man character who everything he touches whether it's personal life or work or anything else, total failure. He just can mess up everything, but he has this beautiful life force. So when everything is failing, he gets up and he does this Greek dance, and they play the Greek music, and it's just fantastic. The movie is wonderful, and Anthony Quinn is like a supreme actor. So if you haven't seen the movie Zorba the Greek, obviously now you can watch it on your device whenever you want. Really worth seeing. And the young man who's his protagonist, he says to him at a certain point, Zorba, have you ever been married? And Anthony Quinn growls at him. Alan Bates is the young man. They're on a boat going to do some idiotic adventure that's going to fail. And he says to him, Zorba, have you ever been married? And Anthony Quinn growls in his inimitable way, am I not a man? Of course I've been married. Wife, house, kids, the full catastrophe. And I loved that phrase. So I just kind of filed it away for the time. And then it felt like, as I said, I couldn't get rid of that title. It was basically the title of the book, and it was based on, at that point, 11 years of teaching in the stress reduction clinic at UMass, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, we call it, that I started in 1979. And
I'd like to, if possible, jump into full catastrophe.
For sure.
The way I see it is full catastrophe is sort of like body, mind, and your other, 15 books, but your other big book, Wherever You Go, There You Are, is sort of heart mind. So let's jump into body mind for a second, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of clinical work you've got on the back, you've got all these references to the 720 or more hospitals which mindfulness-based stress reduction methods are used to help relieve pain, to help all kinds of maladies. But the thing is that they're doing a lot of research on it, but it kind of sounds like you said when it first started, and I think in 1979, they had to kind of prove themselves that they weren't a woo-woo sort of science, that they weren't a soft science, that there was hard science, that could actually bring verifiable results. And it's kind of amazing, just a couple of numbers that with regard to pain reduction, 87% improvement in mood, 77% improvement in psychological distress. Were you surprised at the success of this meditation practice that you had?
Because I'd experienced plenty of pain on retreats myself, at sessions or, long retreats, where some retreats we would take vows to not make any voluntary movements for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. And, after the first hour, if you're not used to that, or even maybe 10 minutes in, something's hurting, like your knee or whatever, and you're sitting with it, and the pain, I'm not telling any of you anything you don't already know, but the pain sometimes of sitting with your back or your knees or your shoulders when you made a vow not to move, not to shift your posture, just to see and to learn. It's not a masochistic endeavor, but to just explore and experiment with it. And the pain is insane. And I realized, all I need to do is get up and the pain will go away. But there are people whose bodies are such because they've had car accidents or whatever, and there's no escape for them. They cannot just get up or shift their posture and the pain will go away. So these kinds of practices, because when you're sitting with that intensity of pain, it becomes like you're a mirror reflecting back to you the difference between pain and suffering. And that's not to diminish the experience of pain at all, but there is a big difference between pain and suffering. And suffering has to do with, in some sense, the meaning that you attribute to the pain, your conversations inside your own head about how intense it is, how long it's going to last. It's going to last forever. The thoughts that say it's going to last forever, it's going to affect everything I do, or it's killing me. And so to actually investigate in a meditative way, when the thought arises, this is killing me. Well, is that actually true? And then the awareness function, which is very different from thinking, and we can get more into this later, which is, in my vocabulary, synonymous with mindfulness. So awareness, mindfulness, and they are a superpower. This is a superpower. Thinking is also a superpower, but awareness is a higher order of magnitude superpower. So when you bring awareness to the sensations and the cognitive dimension, the thoughts associated with this is killing me, and the emotion, the anger, the frustration, the regret, whatever it is, then all of a sudden the awareness can actually see that the suffering is a compound experience. And when you take away or liberate the thoughts, because they're just thoughts, they're not necessarily true. There's a story you're telling yourself about my suffering. And the my is the problem, not the suffering. And, and the emotion is the same. And then even the sensation, you can just zero right into it. Is this killing me right in this timeless moment? And the answer is invariably no. But then the thought arises, but what if this goes on forever? And that's when you remind yourself that, but we're just staying in the present moment. So the more you can learn to actually inhabit the present moment as your as the neuroscientists would say, your default mode, then you have a kind of new degree of freedom in dealing with things that nobody should really have to deal with ever, but we do. And so even before we did studies on it, we could see just from the anecdotes of the people going through this 8-week program, they were saying, and they would say to their doctors, I remember one person saying to their neurologist, that program that you referred to me did more for me in 8 weeks than you've done for me in 8 years. And they weren't being, mean to the doctor. They were just speaking about their experience, which was really, in some sense, revelatory, because it suggests that there is a way to be in a wise relationship, let's say, with experience, such that it uncouples pain from suffering.
And really,
is this making sense to you the way I'm talking?
Yeah, absolutely. The basis kind of is that that we create an awful lot of the suffering that we undergo during physical illness. If we can just take that away, we can reduce that. Now, we can't get off this mortal coil, right? A body that's in decline or diseased, meditation.
Sickness, old age, and death. That's the curriculum.
Yeah,
right?
Meditation is not going to reverse that, but
it can liberate it in a certain way. But that doesn't necessarily diminish the pain of it or the grief or from loss or anything like that. So it really is the human condition, and so I'll just loop that back to the full catastrophe. That's why I called it that, because just calling it stress just doesn't have any emotional, sort of valence. Whereas thinking of it as the full catastrophe, and then that you could get up and, I'm not saying dance like Zorba to it, but in some way or other find ways to navigate life while we're still breathing. And we would say to people right from the bat, with all these very challenging medical diagnoses, from our perspective, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And we're going to take the next 8 weeks and pour energy into attending to what's right with you. Let the rest of the hospital and your medical team take care of what's wrong with you, in quotes, and see what happens. And the results that got published in the medical literature were really the result of people taking on that challenge in that kind of a way. And then you could practically hear the symptoms dropping over the course of the 8 weeks and the complaints and the challenges. It's not like everybody threw away their crutches and walked away like lords, but it's like they learned how to be in wiser relationship with whatever the condition is, realizing that ultimately, sickness, old age, and death are inevitable, but the suffering I don't want to say is optional, but the suffering one can approach in a vast array of different ways that are actually enlivening, liberating, and illuminating even. And that's kind of like the curriculum. That's why, and stress, a lot of translators translate dukkha as stress.
For those who may not be familiar, it's not that many people. To tell you the truth, Jon, I only discovered your teachings about 2 or 3 months ago.
How refreshing!
Yeah. Well, I had somebody tell me that they read your books 20 years ago, and I could only say that this very moment is fresh and fresh and fresh. So I found your teaching very fresh and very, very new. But could you just tell us very quickly about the MBSR program and the 3 modes of
well,
meditation?
It's outlined in Full Catastrophe Living, and it is a big book because there are a lot of details in that book and a lot of science to support it now. I could revise it again, but I'm not going to because there's so much more science. You can't see it behind me, but I don't have any bookshelf space for all the issues of this journal, Mindfulness, scientific journal. They're piled up on my floor. I almost have no floor space because of them. And so it's become a major field in science, in both psychology, neuroscience, and a whole bunch of sociology, even in other areas. So mindfulness, or Dharma in the form of mindfulness, has penetrated into the academic world in a wide range of different guises, and in some of it quite profound. And out of the scientific world, it's moving more into other places, including, hopefully, in the end, governance, how we govern ourselves as societies, because you can see how well it's going right at the moment. And I just came back from a conference in Geneva, the UN hosting a conference under the auspices of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on mindfulness. They called it United and Present, 3 days, and did it in collaboration the last day with the hospitals, plural, associated with the University of Geneva, where they've been doing mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression for decades. So there is a certain way in which there is a flowering of what I would call little d Dharma, so to speak, not Buddhism, but not Buddhism, and that it is moving into the mainstream in ways that I feel are kind of like one of the few hopes for planet Earth at this moment. Because as human beings, if we were going to diagnose what's the matter with planet Earth, it's not the cockroaches that are creating problems, or the various viruses, or anything else. It's the human mind when it doesn't know itself, and we're seeing it expressing just even today at levels of pathology that are actually jaw-dropping. Mm-hmm. And yet, once you've created a kind of situation or cul-de-sac that we seem to be in, the stakes are very high, but the options for sort of liberating ourselves from the consequences of our own choices are limited. So I do really see that the Dharma has a role in healing the planet, all sorts of ways, and that's what the UN is trying to promote at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that shortly, and that's a really critical point, because if inside and outside are not two, and your mindfulness-based stress reduction is all about accepting the messiness inside, how can we accept the messiness outside? But first, I want to touch on some things. One thing that really surprised me, moving on to wherever you go, the heart mind. You do note, and I think it's a lovely touch that within Asia, the Asian languages, the heart and the mind are the same character.
Same word.
Yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful notion. But a couple of things, and I'm just wondering
Well,
if
let
you
me
got
stop
this.
you there for one
Mhm.
second, just to
Okay.
emphasize that point, that because when people hear the word mindfulness and they don't have any relationship to Dharma practice or meditation, the word mind, connotes certain things in the English language, but in almost all Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart is the same word. So what I say quite often is, if you don't hear heartfulness when you hear mindfulness being spoken or when you read it, that you're not understanding what it is, because it's said in the traditions, two wings, one bird. So if you don't understand that compassion and loving kindness are completely embedded into mindfulness intrinsically, never mind the Brahma Viharas, which is another subject, but we could talk about it. Then you're really not understanding what mindfulness-based interventions are now. And mindfulness-based stress reduction, just one. There are a whole bunch of them that have been developed over the decades and studied for application in different contexts. So I
Nice.
just want to
Yeah.
interject that. So
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
go ahead with where
Yeah,
you were
fabulous.
going.
So one thing that really surprised me was, as I said, that the so many Zen elements in your writing, and one is inquiry, and how you're telling people to almost in a koan like way to ask the question over and over: What is my way? What is my path?
Not almost in a
Who am
koan-like
I?
way. Not almost in a koan-like way. In a koan-like way.
Uh-huh.
Okay. No, but the word inquiry kind of is a sanitized version of what my Korean Zen teacher used to call Dharma combat,
Mm.
where he would just throw stuff at you, and you had to respond appropriately. And if your mind got attached to what he was saying, it's like jujitsu. It's like the feints are supposed to throw you off, and you're supposed to, in some sense, demonstrate your understanding in a way that uses words but beyond words. So I mean, John Tarrant wrote an entire book about koan practice. I mean, an extraordinary book, and bring me that rhinoceros. Well, yeah, that's a big challenge, right? So and Sansanim used to say, "Open your mouth and you're wrong." So this is one of the ways in which Dharma is really a love affair with a way of being that goes beyond rational linear thought, and it's more in a sense like poetry than it's like living poetry in a certain way, and non-attachment to the story of me, starring me, and how great it is or how horrible it is. And it's not that we don't have that story. We have that story all the time. And you can't really get rid of the personal pronouns. But the ones, because nowadays, and the whole right wing has reacted against pronouns, because everybody was asking everybody, what are your pronouns? And that was making its way into universities, and all of that kind of stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, the most problematic pronouns of all are I, me, and mine. And the Buddha, had something to say about that being the key issue.
Another Zen point that you bring up is not knowing, and Sun Tzu was famous for his "just don't know," and you write open to not knowing, perhaps allowing yourself to come to the point of admitting I don't know, and then experimenting with relaxing a bit into this not knowing instead of condemning yourself for it.
Yeah, well, that's no big deal. Every scientist knows that what they know is is not their friend in a certain way, because it could be a barrier to the insight into the next step beyond what's known. Krishnamurti wrote a whole book called Freedom from the Known. So the known can be tyrannizing or imprisoning in a certain way. And what he was teaching us was to develop what he called don't know mind. And he was inimitable, and it's fun to imitate him because his English was just unbelievable. He never bothered to really learn it, so he invented a kind of Zen English, Zen Korean English, which was just mind-blowing. And, so he called don't know mind, don't know mind, don't know. He'd say, who are you? And then, he'd imitate the answer. So he'd teach us like to sit asking the question, what am I or who am I? Standard Zen practice. And he's sitting up there in his robes and shaved head and, big Zen stick and everything. And he'd go, what am I? And then he'd get a quizzical look on his face and screw it up at an angle and then say, don't know. And he'd roar it like that. And then he'd say, you keep this don't know mind. And, it had a very powerful effect on a lot of his students, and of course, a lot of them wound up imitating him and making it kind of idiotic and everything else. But the heart of it was, that just like any great scientist, what you know can get in the way of what you don't know. So, and basically it was a way of teaching us to not believe our thoughts, but to actually recognize that there are other forms of intelligence that are also at play, that are, as I said, bigger than thinking or orthogonal to thinking, complementary to it. And awareness is the kind of hidden variable. It's hidden in plain sight. Everybody's born with awareness. We all have the capacity for awareness, but what we don't have is access to awareness when we may need it most. So that's what the meditation practice is exercising the muscle, so to speak, at times when, you don't necessarily, so your life is not in danger or your future or whatever it is. And you're exercising a muscle that's teaching you mind wanders, you bring it back. Mind wanders, you bring it back. Mind wanders, you bring it back. But that's about attention. But then when you bring it back, what are you attending? And it's like you're learning how to actually occupy the space or take up residency in an awareness that's never not here. But if you're not aware of it, then it's not here. So you have to learn how to access it, which is what formal meditation practice and sessions and, retreats are all about. And I'm not telling, I don't think anybody would be on this call if you didn't already know everything that I'm saying. It's elementary, it's axiomatic, but it's sometimes fun to talk about because every teacher winds up framing the Dharma slightly differently, as I said. And that's really good because every student is unique. So some students can hear it one way, from one teacher, but they will not hear it from another teacher because whatever the conditions are, they're not completely, open to that kind of transmission. But when the transmission happens, it's like, it is a realization. It's a recognition, that jaw-dropping recognition of, this is it. This is it. This moment is it. And if you want to, have everything in your life be filtered through liking and disliking, or through the personal pronouns I, me, and mine, and the story of me, that's a prescription for suffering. One way or another way, an infinite number of ways that it could happen, but the Buddha was pointing out, that's a prescription for suffering. And if you don't do it, that's a prescription for intrinsic recognition of your well-being while you're breathing. We don't have that great a track record with the dead. Other people are preoccupied with, talking to dead ancestors and stuff like that, or past lives. But for me, at least, and the people that I work with, it's like this life is the important life, and this moment is the only moment. And that is profoundly and I think intrinsically liberating. And I hope we get to actually have some Q&A or conversation about it, because I'd really like to hear, how you're responding as practitioners to what I'm saying, because, in the end, I mean, this is really not just fun, but in some sense, kind of, we're all continually learning from each other. So I'm just telling you stuff you undoubtedly already know.
Another thing, Jon, is that you talk about is embodiment quite a bit. And I really loved your discussion of sitting with dignity, meditating with dignity, and meditating, mountain meditation, lake meditation. And I think something that you recognize, particularly in your body scans, is this embodiment of the teachings in the body itself.
Well, that is classically the first foundation of mindfulness. The Buddha taught 4 foundations of mindfulness, and the first is the body. So it's really wonderful place to drop in and to befriend. And yeah, so and then you'll notice, I mean, the second foundation, of course, has to do with what's called Vedanas, or the sort of experience of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So as soon as we get into the body, well, like, if it has a problem, we don't want that problem. We want the problem to go away. So the Vedanas is, well, we want everything to go away that's unpleasant. We want to pursue everything that's pleasant, and we don't even notice everything that isn't on our radar because it's neither pleasant or unpleasant to me, who is the only important person on the planet. So this is a profoundly liberative practice, because insight into the way the mind works like that is intrinsically liberating, because you realize, holy cow, I'm just creating a kind of fog of self preoccupation and living inside those thoughts and pursuing, what I think is going to be in my benefit, underscore the my, and pushing away everything that I don't think will be in my benefit. And the meditation practice can reveal that there's nothing wrong with caring for your own benefit or pushing away, things that we really don't want. But if you're caught in it, and if that's the extent to which you understand who you are, then you're basically living in, I would say, not just a dream, but something of an unfortunate nightmare. And it only takes 1 second to realize that it's a dream, and you're already awake and liberated from it. And then if that doesn't mean that the next moment you won't get back into it. So it's not like, I had a wonderful meditative experience and now I'm liberated for the rest of my life, but it's moment by moment by moment. Learning how to inhabit awareness is our default mode. And then there's no I, me, and mine unless it arises in thought. And then when it arises, awareness recognizes it and it self-liberates, as the Tibetans like to say, in no time. But that's, but that doesn't just happen. I mean, you have to get, as I sometimes like to put it, your ass on the cushion on a regular basis. And the vocabulary that I've kind of grown into over the decades is that it was kind of a realization at a certain point when I take my seat on my zafu in the morning, which I do in a very disciplined way, because there's nothing like Zen to keep you really, really, really disciplined for your entire life. But I came to a realization after a few decades that I wasn't doing it for discipline in a certain way or for being rigorous or rigid. I was doing it out of love, that it was like a radical act of sanity and love to get up early and put my ass on a cushion and keep it there longer than my thinking mind wanted it to stay there. And that it was like profoundly liberating, but it was also a love affair. Like there's nothing better and more wonderful to do until the next thing that has to be done. Like, if your kids come and want you to feed them, then that's the next way in which the most wonderful thing appears. And so then the entire world is embedded in every moment, and then sitting is just a kind of like tuning the instrument, and then life is playing the instrument, and there's no separation. And sometimes you have to tune while you're playing, even.
So we were talking earlier about the broader world, and really about mindfulness spilling out of the laboratory into the world, and how do we deal with this world, under UN auspices or not. And one thing that you stress a lot, I felt like, as I mentioned earlier, that was applicable to both personal but to the universe, because what's the difference really, is this eschewing the messiness of life, not eschewing the messiness of life. In other words, realizing that the messiness of life is itself awakening. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really. No, it's just life. It's like, it's dukkha. And it's, there's a lot of pain associated with it. I mean, whether we're talking about individuals, aging, sickness, and death. I mean, this is like very real stuff. And then what's going on planet Earth? If you forget all the politics for a moment, just the global warming, those of us who actually not just believe, but know that science has significant forewarnings about the way in which we are not taking care of the planet, and the way greed, hatred, and delusion on an industrial scale are actually creating an environment where maybe the billionaires will be okay in the next generation or two, before even they won't be, but everybody else is going to be in a hell realm. And if you see that, and you believe that the scientists aren't just kidding about it, but that all of the, and that anything about chaos theory and how that interacts with weather and stuff like that, the fact is you can throw things out of kilter in such a way that it's very hard to get back the regulatory processes that have kept Gaia more or less in the human realm, even with ice ages over, the past, millions of years. And now our cleverness and our industriousness, all puns intended, are potentially pushing us over a cliff. And people like, the people who are in power now, Donald Trump being the prime pathological example of it, just don't believe anything that's not, in their playbook and their own self-interest. And so we're going to be suffering the consequences of that, ignoring the laws of physics, if you will, to the point where, if the curriculum is human suffering and the potential for liberation from human suffering, it really is worth trying to orient your life to minimize harm and maximize good, minimize suffering for yourself and everybody else, and maximize well-being on a planetary level as well as on the individual and family level and so forth. And to do that requires some degree of wisdom. And, so there has to be some kind of intersection, or sometimes I put it this way. We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, right? The species name is Homo sapiens sapiens. The species that is aware and is aware that it's aware. So some people mistranslate sapere from the Latin, which means to taste or to know, as cognition, but it's not cognition. The knowing is that direct knowing of, like, you bite into a banana, you know the banana. You don't go to the encyclopedia of bananas and read about, esters and things like that, and the life cycle of the banana plant. So that direct one taste, if you will, or direct transmission outside the sutras, if we are Homo sapiens sapiens, the species that is aware and is aware that it's aware, I think we have a little way to go, at least, to live our way into it. And the fact that we're having this conversation on a technology that would have blown our minds 15 years ago, I mean, absolutely blown our minds. And there are people probably here from all sorts of different time zones, and could be time zones like, 12 hours away from wherever you are. This is quite extraordinary. And, the Dharma has moved into the world in ways that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. And maybe it's time for us as humans, as Homo sapiens sapiens, to wake up to that name and live our way into it and learn how to govern ourselves. The word Dharma means governance. It means lawfulness. What are the laws? Like, you create trouble, you have trouble. You create well-being, you have well-being. Where does the creation of trouble or well-being come from? It comes from the human mind and the human heart. And so, in a way, maybe the Dharma really needs to be far more in ascendancy in the coming years and decades than it is at this moment, but the trajectory is still hopeful. I mean, I'm not saying the UN is going to transform the world, but I think by any stretch of the imagination. But it's interesting to know that even in Dag Hammarskjöld's day, it was about mindfulness for him. If you read what he writes, I mean, it's all mindfulness. And now they're making it much more explicit, and even developed a meditation room, dedicated meditation room in Geneva at the UN. And so it's a kind of, for me, it's symptomatic of a shift that I sometimes call an orthogonal rotation in consciousness. Orthogonal being a word from quantum physics and, and geometry, where a dimension is orthogonal to other dimensions when it's at right angles to it. So an orthogonal dimension in a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional universe would be awareness. It operates in all of those dimensions, but it's another dimension in which you can not only reside, but actually think and make decisions and orient, and not be, or at least be aware of, when you are driven by small-minded greed, hatred, and delusion, and the costs of that, as opposed to some larger we the people, we the planet, we humans, but far beyond just mere humans, because like all beings really need to be included in this. How do we govern ourselves so that we'll be around in some kind of form of ourselves for, in our grandchildren's time and our grandchildren's grandchildren's time, and who knows what is going to happen to humanity ultimately on this planet. And we don't want to be on this planet. A lot of people want to go off to some other planet, but it's really nice to at least not despoil this one beyond recognition before we, before a few privileged gazillionaires move to Mars.
Indeed. So what I'd like to do, John, if that's okay, is switch gears here a little bit and bring in John Tarrant. It must have been 1995 or something, and I was living on the East Coast, and Jon Tarrant said, "Go look up this guy, Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's doing some interesting things in Boston." And I never did, but I'm glad that we have time tonight to spend time together. So I'd like to bring in John, and I know you had read the story of the Buddha, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and
got it right here.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll just start with the introduction. this book is a jewel, and the introduction, John. I mean, it's just your poetry just transmits itself, and so of course, I know the story of the Buddha, forever, but this really is a new, awakening to it, so to speak. So it's an experience to actually drink in your words, because you are a poet and you are, a devoted teacher, and it feels to me like somehow you brought all this together in a way that is just gobsmackingly compelling, illuminating, and easy. So I think that's very auspicious to remind the world of that story in the language that you've chosen to do it in, and it really feels like just what the world needs. And I hope a lot of people not only buy it and read it, but reflect on how, the story of the Buddha is really the story of human potential, of what a human can be if we recognize our, truest original nature, whatever language you want to say. So I just want to thank you for it. It's beautiful. And I hope it gets a very, very, very wide audience.
Thanks, Jon. It's great to have you talking here. One of my friends was saying recently what an achievement it's been that with mindfulness, MBSR, that how much it's taken over the world, and it started, it's this very small thing, and you could see that it would really help people, and then you just kept cultivating that field, and the plant kept growing and things like that.
So, it also has its challenges, I might say, because MBSR is no better than the person who's teaching it. And what are the requirements to teach MBSR? Well, you have to have what I would say is like a deep Dharma practice. And how do you come by a deep Dharma practice? Well, that's another koan, like the rhinoceros. So, I'm hoping that, however, and I trust, and I've seen enough of MBSR teachers to know that a lot of them are really fabulous. But I do think that that's kind of always a challenge, is to kind of make sure that it doesn't become one more popular cognitive behavioral intervention and the Dharma dimension's completely lost because people don't even know how to spell the word Dharma, never mind have a practice that, So one of the principles that I always insisted on with my team was that you don't ask any more of a person in the class than you're asking of yourself that day in terms of formal practice. So if you're asking 45-minute body scan 6 days a week for people in MBSR, you're doing a 45-minute body scan 6 days a week and not skimping on it or sitting or yoga or whatever it is. So sorry to interrupt, but I just felt like I'd throw that in as a kind of grace note.
No, that's good. Good leadership is to do the thing you're preaching. So yeah, and it's kind of nice. I like that. What can I say here? One of the things I'm kind of interested in is how the self-organizing quality of meditation and Zen, really, that if you put yourself in it, it's good if you not to be lazy, but to sort of have a feeling for the current of meditation, so that it will meditation will teach meditation eventually, but you do have, as you said, put your ass on the cushion. But it is a wonderful thing that there doesn't have to be a me outside the me who's meditating, who's teaching me how to meditate and do those sort of things. So I suppose that'd be one of the things I kind of really like about the Zen approach. It's not quite plumbing. It's more of a dance form or an art form or something like that.
Absolutely.
Although every now and again I get exasperated and try and teach it as plumbing. Just do this. But yeah. So I think that's. Do you have anything to say about it as a sort of? It's really, I suppose, a form beyond the idea of the self that does the form.
Yeah, that's why I started to use the vocabulary of a love affair, because everybody is going to actually experience it differently. I don't want to use the verb to do associated with meditation, but to practice meditation. Even the word practice gives the sense that it's an ongoing process, as opposed to a no time at all, moment by moment process in the timeless domain. And it feels to me like the more we kind of recognize that every moment is the meditation practice, this is it. It's like there's no differentiation between every single waking moment, let's say at least, is the meditation practice. And awareness is kind of like an Archimedes fulcrum that can actually completely transform your story of what's happening in the present moment by recognizing that you're just generating a story. And when you stay more in the open spaciousness of awareness, it really is a superpower. I mean, I've thought about this some, that if you ask, well, what do we know that has no center? Because, you challenge people, can you find the center of your awareness? And can you find the outer edge of your awareness, the circumference or the periphery? And people look and, all of a sudden people realize, like, and actually it's not fair to call it your awareness.
Right.
Why the hell would you think of it as my awareness? You have nothing to do with it. It's like a gift.
No.
It's such a gift. I mean, it's such a mystery, like that we are born with awareness, but as I said, we need to cultivate access to it, or we don't learn how to set that as, I used this term before, the neuroscientists use it, your default mode. So the more we can actually learn to inhabit this timeless moment, well, then the meditation practice and life become completely coextensive. And when you relate to the practice that way, or to the Dharma that way, that every moment is this moment, then that has a powerful effect on experience in this moment, whether it's, with a partner or a spouse or a colleague or a grandchild or pain or suffering, unwanted conditions, or for that matter, what we're seeing happen on planet Earth. I mean, we really do need to learn how to inhabit our intrinsic capacity for wakefulness. And as I said, and maybe provocatively, but I see it that way, that it's not separate from compassion. So we don't need to cultivate compassion separately or loving kindness separately, and then mindfulness on the other side. That they're one and the same. And that there's a nice little thing that I've started to think about or talk about that has to do with the four immeasurables, or the divine abodes, or they're called the refuges, because, because we are now at a point on planet Earth where they're like refugees. I mean, it's like creating huge amounts of geopolitical problems because our wars are creating and famines are creating refugees that are moving all over the planet. And that's what led to the border issues with Mexico and Trump's election and everything else, all these refugees. And basically, I think it's important for us to recognize that, in a sense, we're all refugees. And refugee, is related to taking refuge. Refugees are looking for refuge. And how can we actually offer and embody refuge? And it's really worthy of the word refuge and relief. And so these are kind of koans on an international level, so to speak, that we should really start thinking about, because the people who we see as refugees are no different from us. And, in 1 second, we could be the refugees. And the way it's going, it may be that way, actually. And so I feel like if the Dharma was, as I said before, if the Dharma is ever been of any value in the world, this moment is the moment that it's more important than it has ever been before. And that it's a all hands on deck moment. So it's not like, let's just wait for the next Buddha to come and, illuminate us all and make everything better. I don't think that's in the cards. I think we have to be the cells of the body politic, all of us, and learn how to regulate and influence those other cells that are in some sense driven by fear or greed or hatred or othering, and seeing, the refugees as a problem and or whatever it is, or what's going on in Minneapolis is just so unbelievable, but that's is just kind of a snapshot of what's to come. And it's all unfolding at warp speed. So, again, I feel like I don't see 10 things on the horizon that would be really, valuable or useful at this point in time, other than what we've been talking about since we started. And I feel like this entire conversation is in some sense a meditation practice, but not one that's merely appealing to thought, but in some sense, I hope, resonating with something much deeper in you, which is probably the mystery of your original motivation for coming on in the first place. And I love that. I think that's part of the love affair. And that the more we understand, how small the I, me, and mine are, but how big awareness is, it's boundless. It's like space itself. There's nothing that we know that's like awareness except space. The universe, no center, no periphery. And so, in a certain way, at least in our corner of the universe, we don't know of any other beings that have this property quite the way we have it. Maybe elephants have their own, and rhinoceroses and cockroaches and everything else, but we have what we have. And can we learn to mobilize it, utilize it for the sake of non-harming, for this ahimsa, and then make new laws that outlaw the kind of harm that we're seeing now. Just make it illegal. And then, of course, you have to enforce it. And so I know it's a big ask for us to learn how to govern ourselves appropriately, but I feel like as human beings, we can do a far better job than we are doing. And we have a lot going for us. I'm surprised I'm saying this maybe, but I'm very optimistic that we can actually do this after we've screwed it up in every other conceivable way. But I don't want to screw it up to the point where the world is unlivable.
I have some, I think often about, Zen began to really take shape in China, where one of the things I had to deal with was Genghis Khan. And people had to, some of the great a number of the great teachers had to just, we got to leave town and move to another state because, the troops are coming through.
The hordes, yeah.
And running people through with bayonets, with lances, and burning monasteries and things. And in some sense, that was a context in which you're just not going to lie down and hate people. You've got to keep practicing, and you've got to work with what you can, and sometimes work with the rulers who are doing that, or work with the Koan study in Japan was generated by people who fled China and thought, well, we'll take it over here, maybe something.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting thought, because when I go to China to teach, which I've stopped doing because of the way the political things have been unfolding in the past few years, but I used to go to China all the time, and I loved saying the following, because there are a lot of MBSR teachers in China, probably more than all of the rest of the world combined. And I would say the average age is maybe 30. And I would say things like, you think MBSR is so great, but MBSR is at best 40, 45 years old in the United States. But the M is 4,000 or 5,000 years old in your tradition. And the Dharma, the Zen tradition, the Chan tradition, there's nothing second on planet Earth to the beauty and wisdom of the Chan tradition. Just nothing. I mean, expressed in art, expressed in koans, expressed in every poetry, and expressed in every conceivable way. Now, if China were to wake up to its own Dharma lineage and history, the world would be different overnight. And it's a very low probability but high impact possibility. And I sort of, in the back of my mind, still can't stop thinking that, this is very, very deep in Chinese culture. Very, very deep. And the time may come when they wake up to that wisdom, and being the 800-pound gorilla on the planet economically, things could shift very rapidly. I'm not betting on it happening, but I do feel like the more seeds we can plant in that regard. So I do a lot of online stuff with people in China. And it is, all I can say is alive and well, and it has a life of its own, and it's Dharma. And so in that sense, it's as I think I must have said, it's a kind of conceit to think I'm doing the practice.
Right.
After 30 or 40 years, I mean, you discover that's a conceit. I mean, it's more appropriate, more accurate to say the practice is doing you more than you're doing the practice. And there's something about that I feel like is poetic, actually, and very, very beautiful, and has practical outcomes.
That's great. Yeah. Well, the universe is doing us too. The whole idea of being a little person wandering around and adjusting the universe so it fits me is not as good as the idea the universe is just doing it. Is weird.
Well, it goes back to the periodic table, which everybody had a periodic table in chemistry class in high school, but no one understood what it really was. But the periodic table, all of those elements except hydrogen and helium, but there's no helium in our bodies, but all the other elements in our bodies, except for the hydrogen, came out of, multiple cycles of exploding stars, because that's the only place where you can get enough heat and enough energy to put protons and neutrons together to create carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and the stuff of our body. And so we really are the children of the universe, and the mystery of how this all is supposed to have come out of a big bang, out of nothing. It's like there's a certain way in which it's quite poetic.
That certainly comes out of catastrophe. Jon Joseph, if you believing in coincidence and all, that Tom Kirshner just appeared on screen, and I thought it might be fun to ask him if he has anything to say. He's
Sure,
probably in Kyoto,
absolutely.
I imagine. Yeah.
Tom, how any thoughts here?
Too many. Am I? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all I can say is I agree with everything I've heard this evening, and it's really quite inspiring. Just a few things about awareness, the importance of which has dawned on me rather late in my practice. I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but I think that Zen, as someone who's been in a Zen tradition for a long time now, it seems to me that Zen can get in its own way. People who I think have a certain drive toward or proclivity to the practice, I think can wake up to the importance and the centrality of awareness, maybe rather early in their search. But over the years, looking at myself in particular, and many of the people I know that are involved in Zen practice, and when I heard the title, Three Pillars of Zen, I went, uh-oh. I think it's been a very valuable book for a lot of people, but it got me started off in exactly the wrong direction.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
I wasted years in the monastery, and I'm not just talking about myself. I mean, decades, people I know who have done Zen practice for decades, always looking for the magical experience that will give them a new reality and they'll be okay for the rest of their lives, but, and completely ignoring the present moment. And I was stuck in that trap. And I was also intrigued with what you were saying about pain versus suffering, because this is a very big issue with the teacher Shinzen Young, who I think with his technique of actually watching, so don't worry about stopping thought. Don't be searching for anything. Just label thoughts. Be very, very aware of the thoughts that are coming up. Is this body? Is it image? Is it talk? And then be very aware of those times when there's nothing going on. And be aware of all this in a completely open and non-resisting way to it. A non-resisting openness to the reality of what your mind is doing. And just label it. And realizing...
Thanks, Tom. I think we have to keep moving, but I just want to bring you on because of synchronicity of you appearing suddenly from Kyoto.
I wonder, John, if I can ask Doug Phillips to check in. He's a teacher in the greater Pacific Zen sphere, and 7 or 8 years and MBSR teacher. Doug, any thoughts? Thank you, Tom. There you are.
It's lovely to see you, John.
Hi, Doug. Yeah, really nice to see you.
Well, treat. John actually got me launched in this great project. When I was finishing up the program with him, my teacher, Maureen Stewart, died. And he turned me towards George Bowman and Larry Rosenberg. And so those guys have been a part of my life for a very long time and led me to PZI and John Tarrant and David Weinstein and John. So it's just a real privilege and pleasure to see you. I do have a quick story about Jon Kabat-Zinn. I was sitting in his office right before his book, Full Catastrophe Living, came out. And we were having this conversation, and all of a sudden he gets a phone call. And he's talking seriously with someone on the other, I don't know who it is. And his face just changes. But his voice tone stayed level. We finished the conversation. He turns to me and said, "That was my publisher. I just learned that my book, Full Catastrophe Living, will not have an index." And I was stunned that here's this man's life work coming out. He didn't yell at this publisher or editor or whoever it was. And he moved right along back into the conversation with me. It was one of the most stunning examples of being in the present moment and not getting caught in the past or getting caught in ideas. And that's a model I've carried, or an example I've carried the rest of my life. So it's just, it's a real treat to see the three Johns here. I remember the story of the three sages who start to say goodbye to each other, and they're about to cross the river, and they hear the tiger roar, and the three laugh loudly. So I see three Johns here each other, and it's pretty cool. So thank you.
Wonderful to see you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. We have Ed Brown. We have another luminary. Just Ed, I don't know if you're available or interested in making a comment.
Wow, this is like old home week.
Yeah,
I am here, and I can be seen. And I may be on page 5. I mean, who knows where I am?
Wave your hand. You should come up to the front just by talking. Oh, there you are. Wow.
So it's lovely to see you, John.
I'll give you a big hug.
Yeah, big hug. For somebody who don't know, you sure got your head on straight.
It's eating good bread.
Yeah, I don't eat much bread, but the bread book keeps going, and it's the 55th anniversary. It just came out in October, so it still has a life of its own.
No, it's a classic. It's a classic. It will live forever.
Anyway, wonderful, and it's wonderful to hear your talking, and I so much appreciate being reminded and refreshed and invigorated with language, and your language, and from your teaching and from your experience and practice. And this has been a long time. It's ongoing, and I still remember meeting you at Spirit Rock, and we had name tags, and you said, "Oh, Ed Brown, my hero," and I said, "Oh, Jon Kabat-Zinn, my hero." So still like that. One thing I've been thinking about and appreciating also, John Terrence, in this sense of being in the larger space and coming to and resonating in that larger space. And I think of, you don't do meditation. Meditation undoes you.
Undoes you. Good.
Or redoes you. You're more in tune than with this greater coherent space, which is interesting that you bring up that it could become so chaotic that coherency is not restorable. So that would be catastrophic. Would be. Speaking of catastrophes, anyway, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with everyone and to hear your words of pain and suffering. And
Wonderful to see you, Ed.
thank you, Ed. Hey, Tracy, John Tarrant, Tracy Gaudet is on. Can we just
kidding.
ask her to come in and say hi?
Where
Hi, John.
you?
I'm not on camera.
Oh,
But it's really awesome to see you and to
Well,
hear
your
you.
voice is unmistakable, Tracy.
I miss you,
You don't
so
sound
much.
a day older.
Oh, well, that's why I'm not on camera. You can just keep envisioning that.
Yeah, right. I miss you too.
Yes, and I don't want to end on a negative note. This is not negative, but my question for you, John, I just, of course, completely resonate with we need all hands on deck now in this world. And I was wondering if you have just a moment to say more about what does that look like? Me, I'm all about let's start a movement. We got to save this world. And it's the humanity, as you said, that is so broken. And so I would just love any reflections you have, or any of the Johns, on what does that look like, or what might that look like, and how might we move forward in that vision?
Well, I'll start. but I don't have that much to say about it. I mean, it's wonderful to hear your voice, and I feel like there are scenarios that everybody can imagine of some hero descending godlike from outer space and rescuing all of us. And that's a kind of theme that's like perpetually throughout history, as some Genghis Khan or somebody arises, some holy person and saves the day. I don't think that's the way it's going to happen this time. I think that the Sangha is going to be the way forward, not one Buddha. Now, if there is a Buddha that comes along that can just, but I remember reading this book, this science fiction book a long time ago. What was it called? Where somebody from another planet drops into Earth and everybody starts to worship that planet, that person, and everything, sort of takes off from there and you get some kind of utopia. But, and I feel like, Christianity certainly had that force, and Islam, and, it's all, and even Buddhism, in a different way, but that there's one person who's at the top of it, usually a man. I feel like we need something else than one particular identified godlike leader that is so awe-inspiring that everybody drops their greed, hatred, and delusion. I just don't see that happening nowadays. I feel like this has to be, I used the term before, the body politic. Well, being a biologist, I mean, your body and every one of our bodies has unimaginable number of cells, unimaginable number of cells. Every cell in the body needs an adequate blood supply, or you get cell death and tissue death through necrosis. And then the whole body can die just because you got an infection in your toe or something like that. So if you take that in terms of human beings, that every human, at least on the planet, and let's say all beings, but let's keep it with humans, needs to have adequate resources to live a dignified life and protected from, the usual kinds of elements. So we can do that on planet Earth. We are capable of, we have enough wealth, if it got distributed differently, where everybody could have an adequate amount of it. We could still do business, we can still do corporations, we can still do production, but we could all do it. We could do it more mindfully in a way that we didn't create waste, that nobody's responsible for the costs of the waste, and it's heating the planet and it's polluting the planet. So I would say that that's really what we need, is that the new Buddha is going to be the Sangha, and it has to be a kind of global awakening to some degree. I don't know what fraction of humanity has to undergo that before we learn how to use what we call power and intentionality in a way that allows us to create laws that minimize harm and maximize well-being for all of the cells of the body, because all of the cells of the body are equally deserving in some sense. Now, how we're going to get there, I don't know, but I don't have a better idea than that, Tracy. And I feel like the Dharma is a very, very important part of it, and that we can learn to govern ourselves in communities, in small communities, and then that can translate into larger communities and interactions between those communities and across, divides of various kinds. Because when you come right down to it, I mean, anybody who's done any traveling, realizes that like everybody's the same. Everybody wants well-being. Nobody wants to suffer. I mean, it's pretty basic. Everybody wants to have enough so that their family, their children, their community will be safe and protected and flourish. So maybe we need some kind of global, algorithm for flourishing. And then we enact that and we redefine the governance. Now, probably the easiest way for that to happen is for us to have some kind of horrible nuclear war. And then everybody will say, oh, we can't do that again. But we don't want to do that. We don't want to have a nuclear war. Okay, in order to wake up humanity to how stupid we can be. So how it's going to unfold, Tracy, I just don't know. But I'm trying to sort of do everything I can to tilt things, and I hope everybody is doing everything we can, dharmically speaking, to tilt things in the direction of greater well-being and sanity, and noticing how easy it is for us to succumb to impulses to harm or to other or to, use a certain kind of potential violence even in our own feelings, in our own hearts.
Well, Jon Kabat-Zinn, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you. And thank you, Tracy. Tracy, by way of introduction, has established many wellness programs, holistic wellness programs around the country at Duke and with Veterans Affairs and the like. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, John Tarrant, for being with us and weighing in. Always appreciate it. And thank all of you for attending. I've really enjoyed this with you, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and I know you're a very busy man. I appreciate you.
No, I'm not a busy man. I'm very happy to be here. I mean, this is no effort at all for me. I'm just, I just have so much respect for this Sangha and for, all of the people I know on this call, and I'm guessing everybody else too, although I don't know you. And so, I mean, I feel like this really is an aspect of that love affair I was talking about, and let's just be the love and spread the love and get our asses on the cushions tomorrow morning, if not later tonight. Okay?
That sounds excellent. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.